And the issue here is, which sights do I use? Left, middle, or right?
All of them.
Okay.
All right. Let's look at another bad gun. What did you bring for us, Mr. Ivan?
Well, this was one of my picks. This probably won't come as much of a surprise to anybody. So, this is a gun that was born out of much more contemporary issues, specifically ones stemming from the guys who are incapable of making good decisions. I believe they picked a name for themselves. It was like NATO?
NATO.
NATO. The NATO, which is the coalition of guys. There was a bunch of countries.
The North American Trading Organization.
They were worried that one country on its own is capable of making bad decisions, but if they can get a bunch of them together, maybe they could make the worst possible decisions. So they decided they'd put their heads together and do their best to make bad things happen. And of course, this gun was born out of it. If we didn't have the bad decision organization, we wouldn't have this colossal. It's like a peak of bad decisions. Lots of bad decisions all in one. From its caliber to the gun itself, very little redeemable here. And of course, there's probably only one thing you guys could assume we're talking about. Yeah, because NATO's only ever made one bad gun decision. We're talking about the P90.
In terms of first impressions, whenever you would get a BB gun version of like your favorite gun, there would be extra holes in it, right, for the through bolts.
Right.
It's straight clamshell.
Yep, it's a clamshell housing.
I will say, it doesn't feel like Happy Meal plastic. It does.
It feels marginally better. It still doesn't inspire confidence.
I'd say substantially better than the HK.
Better than G36. Yeah.
Yeah. So it does, and I think that must be a higher glass content or something, because it has a good texture to it in general. But
well, it may also be that this is one clamshell, two clamshell, and it's not like 15. It's not 15 different parts being held together by push pins.
Right, and so the fact that they're screwed together probably adds to the solid feeling. So people are going to be very upset at us for doing this, and I would like to understand, why is it that people like this aside from the Stargazer TV show? I do believe that this was a prime Star Trek weapon, wasn't it?
Right, like the Stargazer TV show, and then it was in a couple of movies, and then it was in the video games. And
yeah.
There's a theory that I've had that I adopted from somebody on Twitter, and it's that the PS90 is attractive to people, like specifically lesbians and people who know nothing about guns. Look at this and they're like, oh my god, I need it. And they can't really articulate why, but it's just like, it's that flavor of cool. It appeals to that audience. I sit at and look at it and go, well, it looks neat, and then you pick it up and it's like, it confirms my theories that European people are actually elfish, and they're all like dwarven elves. They're all tiny, and like they've got arms that are like their arm span is like maybe 5 foot, and their hands are like I don't have pudgy hands, right? I've got slender hands, but they're huge, right? They're big.
Yeah.
But I go to hold this thing, and one hand takes up a bunch. The heel of my hand is down here on this straight part. It does not feel comfortable. Or people say, "Oh, but it's so ergonomic." Maybe if you're 5 foot tall, and this is the way that you can tell how well a gun will fit you, is you grab your case of 223s and see how many 223s you can hold. With me, it's more than 50. I can hold more than 50 223s in one hand. That's my grasp size, measured in 223s. You guys should try the same thing, because if yours is like 20 or whatever, like you've got little baby deformed hands, then probably you'd think that this is an ergonomic gun, because I swear all the designers had to be like 5 foot tall European manlets.
So that, boys, if you disagree with anything we've said so far, but again, before we've gotten to the meat or potatoes of this issue, please go to the Cope section and post 3 things. 1, your height. 2, your IQ, and 3, your 223 count.
How many grasps can you gribble? And for me, I believe it's my large grasp that makes this gun particularly not ergonomic.
I don't know if that's doing it, though, because your fingers still aren't touching to your hand. I think it's the length of pull.
Well, it's like the length of the heel of my hand. Right. It doesn't work. And then, I don't have pudgy hands, but if I hold this thing like it seems like they intend for you to, my my thumb and finger are competing for space in there, and then if I try and hold it differently, this feels terrible. This just doesn't feel good. Right, like
it's awkward. It's just, your elbows just feel stupid.
It really is just awkward. And of course, people who know nothing about guns will look at it and go, "Oh my God, it's the future gun. It's so ergonomic. It's so sleek. It's so good." But then you actually go and hold one, and it's like this isn't good.
So, I will say this gun is trying to vie for my attention as a person who much appreciates iron sights. I count no less than 3.
Yes, it's covered in iron sights. And of course, this surely was a decision made by NATO, a NATO committee thing, and the cope for it is like it's so you can use it with a gas mask or whatever. But
what?
Using iron sights with a gas mask? I haven't wore a lot of gas masks. And the ones I have have been modern. There's no way you're using iron sights.
None of them.
Right? That's one of electronic optics' biggest claim to fame is the fact that you don't have to consistently align your head, especially with as diminutive as those iron sights are. Even the modern gas masks I've worn, you can barely see shit, and they start fogging up, and then it's all wonky, and then the lenses don't want to sit flat. It's just not great, and there's no way you're using these horrible idiot iron sights.
So we know that the P90 was a bad idea. Why don't you talk a little bit about the history of the cartridge and the program?
The guy who's got probably the best video on this is Oxide on YouTube. I'll shout him out for this video every time because he did just such a great job of getting the history and the details right. So during the when Russia was messing around invading Afghanistan and stuff, and they were doing their big bad.
Yeah, they were playing Metal Gear Solid 5.
Yeah, they were playing Metal Gear Solid 5. Their paratroopers utilized titanium plate body armor because Russia has like 90% of the world's titanium reserves. They wish they had steel, like we wish we had titanium here. It's kind of a funny thing. So the Russians were making body armor out of titanium. It is fairly well suited to that because it's as strong as steel. It's generally less ductile than steel, which you kind of want in body armor because it means it's more prone to shattering than it would rather shatter, and it takes more energy to shatter something than dent it. So it's relatively good for that. It behaves like a ceramic in that regard. And so Russian paratroopers had this titanium armor, and it's light. That's probably the biggest advantage it has over steel armor. It's much lighter, much more strength per weight. So the Russians had been using this stuff, and the Russians, after their involvement there, had realized, like, our body armor doesn't actually stop as much as we hoped it would stop. We should make it better. Mm-hmm. Meanwhile, over in the NATO countries, they saw the use of body armor, and they're like, holy cow, this body armor would probably stop a 9mm. And Russia's worried about stopping bigger threats than 9mm, or stopping rifle threats at longer ranges. And so, NATO countries sit there and think, well, if they drop behind our back lines, then, oh geez, our guys you have MP5s and 9mm subguns and 9mm handguns, the Russian troops would just be an unstoppable wave, which is that's just a stupid thing to think about, just from the top to the bottom. First off, your rear echelon guys don't know how to shoot in the first place. You should just give them like axes or something, something they can just swing, not a gun, right? Because they're not acclaimed for their shooting anyway, because it's not their job. But okay, fine. Let's go ahead and concede. Maybe they are good at shooting. Being shot by a 9mm, even if you're wearing body armor, isn't going to be comfortable, and it's certainly not going to make you unstoppable. Especially when you consider the sort
You're going to be very sad.
Right. Considering the effective range of 9mm, the effective range that you'd be making hits at anyway.
Right.
And this is the one thing that the 5.7 ended up improving on, is it did extend the effective range of your rear echelon troops who don't know how to shoot anyway, extended their range, which...
Well, purportedly would have if
right.
Asterisk.
If they knew how to shoot.
Yeah. Or if they even were ever issued these. Right. Which they weren't.
And so they end up deciding, well, the way that we solve our problems that we're going to have is we want something that's light recoiling and very armor penetrating, and they want a PDW for it to go in. And this PDW is supposed to replace. For rear echelon troops, it was sort of meant to replace carbines and existing PDW/submachine guns, because the PDW concept was sort of born in this era. So it was going to replace submachine guns, it was going to replace carbine things, it was going to replace the pistols too. It would be all in one. And of course, this is a PS90, so it's got the 16-inch civilian barrel. The normal barrel ends right there at the end of the receiver. But even if you imagine there's no barrel there, this thing isn't small. Mm-hmm. It's like especially an MP5K is like the same length. This thing isn't substantially more compact.
And the width.
Right, it's very thick.
This bitch is almost 4 inches wide.
This is certainly not something that it would be comfortable to carry around in the way of a handgun, right? Like the guys who...
No, it was so the NATOs could put it under their coat.
Yeah, they'd put it under their coat. It would fit under a vest, and then they'd be all sneaky for executive protection. This was not... There's no way. There's no way executive protection was...
You might as well put a loaf of bread under your coat.
try and offer them up a nice baguette, and maybe they'll stop shooting at you.
Yeah.
Be more effective anyway. But what the NATO countries didn't realize is they were figuring out how they were going to be the requirements for their design of their new cartridge and PDW pairing. They didn't realize that Russia had already thickened their armor. Russia had looked at what they had learned in their little first outings with their titanium armor and figured it needs to be thicker, it needs to be more effective, needs to be shaped. We need to have more plates cover more of the body. So Russia almost immediately has already stepped up what the baseline should be. NATO doesn't know this. Right. They're not paying attention. They're fearing these waves of Russian paratroopers dropping out of the skies, like as if NATO's air defense at the time wouldn't be fly swatting
Russia's paper planes.
Because of course, in the Ukrainian conflict, we saw that where Russia was trying to drop paratroopers over air bases, which are like the most aerially defended.
Right.
And so
it didn't work.
They were losing whole paratrooper planes full of people. Like that's about how that would have gone. But so they had this titanium armor that was old spec that they were testing to, and so they figured the new round has to be able to penetrate it at this distance and this angles and this temperature, all these sort of like ridiculous specs that they usually determine. But bear in mind, it's all obsolete. Whole time it's obsolete. So they put out tenders to a couple different companies. I think 3 end up putting in bids. It's FN, it's HK, and I think there's one other company that thought they were interested, but the only gun they submitted their cartridge with a Thompson Contender, like a single shot gun. And they were saying like our cartridge is so good, if you adopt it, will make you a good gun. Right. And that was never going to happen. NATO makes bad decisions, but not that bad of decisions. Not we'll give you a rain check on your gun. That wasn't going to work. So FN designs the 5.7 cartridge in the P90. HK does their 4.6 cartridge in the MP7. One day we'll have an MP7 here and we'll tell you why that's a bad gun. But with the P90, 5.7 conceptually started in a weird spot because both HK's offering and FN's offering, they didn't base it on existing cartridges. They figured that in order to meet these goals, they had to start with something totally new. FN settles on the 5.7. Just from the beginning, every choice they made adopting this cartridge exemplifies why NATO cannot be trusted to make decisions. It was absolutely some sort of decision by committee thing going on where they decide on a effectively completely straight-walled case. They decide that it's going to be going in a blowback action, and I guess on the gun side of things, they had decided that up front.
That it should be blowback?
I believe so, because I think they had started figuring out the gun first, because they based this on whatever the Hill P, whatever it was. It was a 9mm that used this sort of a magazine where the bullets are stacked like this, and then
the barrel was
angle transition. Yeah. And so they sort of already decided what the gun was going to be like. Of course, maybe I have that backwards, but the only way I can imagine they decide straight wall is they'd already picked these magazines. It's going to be high pressure, right? Because they need to be small diameter, high pressure, high velocity, gets you through armor. That much surely would have been decided upon. But the only way that they could get this to work reliably in a blowback action, because it's effectively straight wall, and the more taper you have, the easier primary extraction is under pressure.
And then that compounded with the fact that you have a bottleneck.
So you have a case that's locked pretty darn tight in the chamber, and it's going to have a hard time. You're going to have a hard time primarily extracting it.
Right.
In a blowback, primary extraction is the second that round's lit off. It would you, because your bolt's already trying to move backwards, whether or not the case is coming with it. And so, 5.7s that don't have lubricant, the way that they decided to get around this, because they wanted the straight wall cartridge so it would work nice in these silly magazines.
Well, let me grab that box of ammo so we can talk about this, because this is purely retarded.
Right. And
with the help of movie magic, I was able to just exchange all 3 months of food stamps I had for this one box of 5.7 by 28. But so yeah, take us through this.
So what they had decided was, again, proprietary case. So doesn't use an existing case set. It's all its own thing, which is just already a weird decision, because they probably should have just used 223 as a case head, because they ended up deciding at 224 caliber projectiles what they wanted. So they used 223 base projectiles with a different case head. Mm-hmm. Of course, the slightly smaller diameter gets you like maybe 3 or 4% extra capacity in any given magazine, but at the cost of they have these straight walls in order to have the cartridges feed in these magazines. But because, for the reason we explained, because it's straight wall, because it's relatively high pressure, it locks itself in the chamber really tight. So what you have with normally with nothing to remediate this, because it's straight blowback and that bolt's trying to go backwards immediately,
right.
It would just rip cases in half. It would rip case heads off. It would stretch cases out. You'd have all sorts of horrible failures happen, or it just leaves the neck. Right? It breaks at the shoulder and leaves the neck in the chamber. So your next round goes and gets stuck there. Then you might have two necks stacked up, or you might have a worse failure and you've got to get case extraction tools and all sorts of stuff. Their solution to this was dry film lubrication on the cases.
And that's why they look a little stupid.
Right.
And feel a little weird.
Right. So the way that stuff works is it's sort of like it's a friction modifier. In auto-loading handguns, especially in defensive ammo, you'll see the silver cases. Usually that's brass case that's nickel plated, because nickel substantially reduces the amount of friction when extraction happens. So for duty ammo, it just guarantees you're a little bit more reliable. I've seen some data that's like it's like a factor of 50. There's 50 times less friction at the moment of primary extraction with nickel plating. I imagine the reason they didn't nickel plate the 5.7 cases is because 50 times wasn't enough, which is alarming all on its own.
Right.
But they go with a dry film lube. Now the other issue that they run into, and I don't know that this is an issue, like I don't know if what was the chicken and what was the egg with this issue, but they end up having trouble again with the with the feeding of this, that they couldn't get it to feed, as I understand, with crimped ammunition, although this may have been something that came along because they ended up designing the 5.7 handgun as a companion to this. But it's got issues where they decided to remediate it by gluing projectiles into cases. And if you go and look at 5.7 reloader forums, there'll be people debating about, like, is this real? And luckily it was clarified in there is now a NATO spec for 5.7. It calls for gluing bullets into cases, not crimping.
Yeah, and we're talking, it's not sealing.
Right, it's not sealing it.
Glue. We're not talking about like what the Russians do to keep the poop out. It's glue.
The thing holding the whole thing that stops you from just pulling the bullet out of the case is glue. And there's reloaders that have tried to emulate the glue, but of course you can crimp it, and reloaders have been able to get it.
What do reloaders do about the lubricant?
So this is another item of contention. They say to never tumble 5.7 brass because you lose all of that lubrication. You can use commercial dry film lubricants. They're aerospace grade stuff, very expensive, and recoat cases. But ordinarily what they'll do is, as long as you're very careful with the cases and only never put it in solvents and treat it very mildly, and
it'll hang out,
you're able to reuse cases to some extent. Now, I have seen people and talked with people who reload 5.7, and they say you get like 2, maybe 3 reloadings out of it before it starts sticking in chambers and ripping apart, which is just it's just inexcusable.
And for a case that's so expensive.
Right, for a proprietary case, very expensive. Prior to just a couple years ago, only one company made the brass, and it was FN, and they charged a lot of money for it. It seems like now maybe PSA and maybe Starline and maybe Fiocchi are also making 5.7 brass, unless one.
We've seen, of course, the Federal.
Right, but
that's the only stuff you see in the box.
As I understood it, Federal is getting their brass from FN.
Oh.
And of course, people have issues with the Federal 5.7 because, as I understand things, they didn't
lubricate them.
Well, they had issues with lubrication, and then they didn't glue bullets into projectiles. Yeah. Federal tried crimping it from the factory, and so they had there was like a whole. Wasn't
there a thing you could use it in the pistol but not the carbine, or one or the other?
One way or the other, where like it would have horrible issues, and the bullet would get pushed all the way into the case, and all the powder gets past it, and then your whole action's full of powder, and then it's always a good time. But that's sort of the head scratcher where like they settle on this. And when I say designed by committee, if this is one guy designing it, any one of these roadblocks that he hit, his solution would be drawing board. We got to go back. We got to find a way to fix this. But when you're designing this with the committee, like every year, a couple months, you meet together and you show them what you've learned. Like the guys who don't understand any, because these committees are invariably run by people who don't know what they're doing. Don't know anything about guns or gun design or any of that. They'll just tell you to keep going and keep going, and you'll solve those issues, right? That can be solved. Where the solving is just like a million band-aids until you have a cartridge that's just got tons of band-aids wrapped around it, and then you put it in a gun that's got tons of band-aids wrapped around it, and that's this. And so in my mind, maybe the 5. I don't think I would hate the P90. I don't think I would classify it as just an all-around bad gun. If they had just chose a better caliber. If they had chose something that was 223 case head based, hey, that would be pretty great. if they had gone with 9mm, right? The gun that they stole this design from was in 9mm in the first place, at least as far as the magazine design.
Yep.
And the way they accomplished that to overcome the taper is the rounds are interspersed.
Yeah.
So one round faces this way, one round faces this way, and they're stacked like that, like in an X shape, and they sit on top of each other. It's a very weird system, but that does also sort of squiggle stack, so it saves you space. And of course, maybe their issue is that. And this is a whole separate tangent, but
you've blasted pretty hard on this. That we haven't even taken it apart.
Duodante Save, the guy who designed the high power, he and/or Browning, they worked together to make the first double stack 9mm magazine. Almost all 9mm magazines that are double stack, single presentation, copied the exact way they did that as far as the geometry and the layout. Practically everything copied it. I feel like part of the reason FN wasn't really bold enough to just use 9mm, because you know what Russia did? Because Russia did the same thing. Russia reached the same conclusions, like, oh, our backline guys are all using 9mm, how do we do it? They just did like 9mm plus P and put tungsten and steel core in it, and guess what? It actually defeats the armor that they wanted it to defeat. And so that's what FN should have done. If they did the P90 in that, I'd say it was a good gun. If they'd done like some sort of armor-piercing 9mm load for it. And of course, I feel like the reason they were so afraid of just doing it in 9mm is because the interspersing of those rounds wasn't geometry anybody knew then. The squiggle stack, single stack, the squiggle double single stack that we've got in like the P365 or the Shield Plus, that didn't exist at this time. No one had really figured out that geometry except the gun that FN sort of stole the homework of. It was all up in the air. And of course, a good gun designer who was designing a gun on his own for reasons that aren't just completely insane would have taken the time and gotten that right. But NATO figures that they'll just like churn around a couple of gun designs in just 1 or 2 years and it'll be great, and they don't. I guess just to add one extra layer to the insanity that is the 5.7's development story, at the final hour, whenever they're finally testing the ammo on the armor that it was meant to penetrate, like the old spec stuff, right? The stuff that was not that the
Russians weren't even using anymore.
Right, Russians weren't using anymore. They'd already phased out. 5.7 and 4.6 both had issues penetrating it because there were changes happening the whole time. And 5.7 ends up winning because they had developed this polymer core bullet that is able to defeat this armor, and it's like 17 grains or whatever, and it's defeating it on velocity alone. And the terminal effects, like if you shot somebody with this, wouldn't hardly do as much damage as you'd expect because the polymer bullet's just going to put like a little needle through it. So it was like the flechette ammo that NATO had tested that they found didn't actually.
It's what boomers say 5.56 does.
Right.
Yeah.
It didn't actually wound people nearly as badly as they needed it to be doing to be an effective combat arm. So 5.7 was just from the very inception, horribly defeated.
Dog shit.
Yes, dog shit.
So, wow, that was a lot of information. Let's talk some more about the build quality of this gun.
Right.
Because that's where I like to get into. And as you guys know, I'm a total trigger queen. If a gun has a bad trigger, I will scream and I will cry.
He'll pout.
But I don't know if you know this, but I'm actually a bullpup lover. There's one thing that make a bullpup trigger usually bad, and it's the linkage from the trigger to the actual fire control unit. If you get that good, the only thing you have to deal with is the quality of your actual fire controls. FN has a fantastic linkage, and yet the fucking dust cover. Oh my god. Talk about Happy Meal. So like this thing doesn't feel very Happy Meal except for that dust cover, which is a complete joke.
It was like an afterthought.
It's a total afterthought, and I feel like it would fail in a way that would induce malfunction.
Probably so.
But here, let me do this left-handed so you guys can experience this with me. We're on it. You just start pulling, and then just at some point through the ice cream and the mush, it goes off.
Yeah.
So it feels like trash.
There is no wall, but it is at least light. Where there's some bullpups where the trigger is like, is it unsafe? Oh, it's not.
But what's way worse, because I've shot some full auto P90s, is the progressive trigger.
This has a progressive trigger, and of course, I won't spoil the surprise yet, but there's a reason this thing has a progressive trigger.
There is a reason.
And it's because designing bullpup trigger packs evidently is impossible, and only one guy is allowed to do it. Only one company is allowed to do it.
Yes, which some of you guys might not know. Everyone thinks, oh, the P90 is so innovative, it's so wonderful. Oh.
It copied almost everything it did.
Yeah. So, the other thing, before we take the sucker apart, every time I've picked up a P90, this isn't mine. I won't buy one of these. I can't.
At one point in time,
almost did.
I wanted one till I had held one, then I was like, oh.
In fact, remember I was doing a trade deal.
Yeah.
And I had you on the phone, and it was a good trade deal no matter how it turned out. But the question was, do I take the P90 or the Scar? And I took the Scar, which is a bad gun. The thing that whenever I pick one of these up and I'm faced with the price tag, and this is even years ago when you could buy one of these for like $900, I look at this receiver, and it is just the most cast dog shit. Like, look at the caliber marking. They aren't even hiding it from you. Look at all of these casting artifacts. JARU cap guns have less casting artifacts than this shit. Like, it's covered in artifacts. They don't even care.
It's like a Hot Wheels car.
They
really is.
Yeah, but Hot Wheel cars at least have the politeness of being small
and a cool flame paint job.
Yeah, but the thing is purely artifact. And so let's take it apart. There's your receiver.
Oh, and there's one more thing I need to talk about.
You're going to talk about the barrel?
Yeah, so the fact that the barrel rotates just like it's held in from rotating by the receiver, that's horrible. The thing that I wanted to talk about, now I don't know if this applies to the short barrel gun, so maybe it doesn't, but this flash hider design, this is a lesson that was learned so very clearly on the M14, where you need to tune the harmonics in your flash hider to the gun itself, right? So whenever the bolt slams shut, there's no more bolt here, but it still sort of does it. The flash hider rings.
Yeah.
Not quite as bad as an M14, but that is annoying. At least for the M14, accuracy-wise, it's devastating. It's really not good to have your thing
be a tuning fork.
Be a tuning fork, right? And it's just, it doesn't inspire confidence to have your gun be a musical instrument. Mm-hmm. It's not something that I'm a fan of by any means, by any description. Maybe it's just me. I can't. Of course,
no, you're 100% right.
Somebody would come up with some crazy story where it's like, well, in combat, the bad guys will hear your flash hider ringing. That's not true.
That guy should fall down.
There's no way that's true. It's like the M1 Grand Ping guy. Like, especially whenever you don't have hearing protection, you're not going to hear that. Like that's just going to blend in with the other ringing that'll be happening. But it's just something that I despise. I bought a screw-on flash hider that rung once, and it sits on my shelf. I will never use it because it's terrible.
So we'll talk about that in a future episode. The thing about the barrel rotating, I don't think people realize how bad that is.
It's not fantastic.
So here's the thing you have to understand. I don't care what company you are. Your barrel will never be completely true. Your bore will never be 100% true to the outside diameter of your barrel. There will always be a tiny degree of eccentricity. Would you agree with that?
Yep. I mean, hammer forging ostensibly gets you as close to true as you can, but it's only as true as the tools you make it with.
Yep. And then guess what? You're doing profile after that.
Right.
So it's important that when you zero your gun, you zero it to where the bullet is going. And where there's that degree of eccentricity, if your barrel just rotates.
There's a triangle of accuracy. It's how rigidly your barrel is to your receiver, to your sights, and your sights to your barrel.
And guess what? If your barrel is just playing around, you're fucked.
Right.
Like, it's just over. And that was a huge issue with the Sten Mark IIIs. Right. Because the barrel was able to kind of rotate around. They had an incredible wandering zero. And that was, sometimes they like welded in place. But is that Fuddler that if this isn't rotating, it has like issues?
I have no idea. Maybe it does. Maybe again, I can't imagine they couldn't have just like, because this is probably cast aluminum. They couldn't have just like put a little AR barrel extension on there and let you cinch it down. It doesn't. To me, it doesn't make sense why they couldn't have just fixed that.
Yeah, I will say I kind of like the charging handle.
Charging handle design isn't bad at all, especially the way it works, and then it separates free of the bolt, so you don't have a bolt needing to come with it, and the bolt's still on its recoil springs.
But just remember, guys, that's the gun. Like, that's what you paid for.
Right.
Like, they are laughing at you. They shot dog grade steel into a mold, and then they didn't even clean it up. They just dropped it on the table and said, "Give me whatever. It's $1,500 or whatever it is now."
It's terrible.
So let's look here. This is whatever it's going to be.
The bolt forward, and that comes up.
Let's do the bolt first.
There's.
See, unlike other gun shows, I'm not going to sit here and pretend I remember by heart how to take all these stupid things apart. You're getting it as it comes.
Is your hammer down?
I cocked it.
Hammer's down. I think you have to have the hammer cocked to disassemble this, which is the mark of a really good gun.
Yeah. God, that singing is so annoying.
Yeah, it's really bad. Ding! 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 Bolt.
Okay. The next most complicated piece of geometry on your firearm that makes it expensive is the bolt.
There's nothing to this thing.
It's a block.
There's nothing to it.
It's so dead simple. They have played you for an absolute fool.
Yeah.
Like, the most mechanically interesting thing is this. I don't know what that's for.
Bolt bounce, probably. Because I bet you this
yeah,
thing
it's a linear hammer.
I bet without it, that thing bolt bounces like a motherfucker.
Yep, so they put a slide hammer in the bolt.
I mean,
cool.
I don't hate it.
I'm not 100% mad at that.
I have to assume that's what that's for. You guys, you Cope boys can let us know in the Cope section if we're wrong, but it's actually you that's wrong.
Yeah, I'll totally read it, idiot. I do like the plunger ejector.
Yeah, I mean that's one of the things that the AR did really well, because people always talk about ejection patterns, and the AR's prevalence in the U.S. really clouds people's minds, where they're like, oh, if the ejection's erratic, something's wrong with the gun. But dude, that's not
really.
It's true of ARs, right? If ARs have erratic ejection, it means your gas system isn't very well sealed, which could be 1,000 different points that can happen at. A bunch of different reasons that can happen. Some of which you can fix, some of which you can't. It's like replacing the gun fixes it. Remove magazine, discard gun, take new gun, insert magazine, and it's fixed. That's sort of a fix. But the other reason the other reason ARs are so consistent there is because that little plunger style ejector sort of solves you get very consistent ejection geometry in that regard. Where something like an AK, you've got a bolt which can be rotated through about quite a bit of different angle, and a carrier that does this on the rails, and so whenever it comes to eject, that case can go pretty much anywhere. Usually goes straight out of the gun, but it's not going to go in a perfect consistent arc. Right. Especially whenever you see ARs that are full auto, that ejection pattern is so darn consistent. And then you see an AK that's full auto, and it's like wee, one's way out there. Oh, some just spill out. Wee, one's way out there.
And she running.
Right, it'll run, but consistent ejection relies on everything playing together nicely. And the way you get that's a spring-loaded ejector.
Yeah. All that to say, cool ejector. So I pulled out the fire control unit, and a lot of FN fanboys will be like, "Oh, look at it's so unique! FN designer it's so good!
FN did the best bullpup trigger ever!
Look!" It's 100% plastic, and it works. Yeah. It works. It's. You do occasionally get issues with some of the, but the parts are not that expensive. They're far more expensive than they should be.
Right.
But it's not bad. But people who think that the P90 was, super hyper innovative. When did the AUG come out?
A long time ago.
In the 70s, I think.
Yeah, I think it would have been 70s.
It's the same.
Yeah.
This is a AUG trigger pack. It's not close. It's not similar. It's the same.
In fact, I believe there's forums out there that have the parts interchangeability list. If you have problems with one, you can take the parts from the other and put them in there.
Why would the chocolate French do this?
I assume the reason for it is because the development cycle for the P90 was
pretty compressed.
Was meant to be at least relatively quick, and so I bet you they were they knew they wanted to do something bullpuppy because they had overall length restrictions, and I guess they figured they couldn't just do an MP5K for whatever reason, an MP5K that's got tungsten ammo, and be like, we're done. We did it. It took us a month. And so they had to look at existing options. And if nothing else, if I have to say something positive about the way the AUG's trigger pack is set up, it's really, really easy to adapt to pretty much anything you want it to do. It could do anything. Very, very easily. In fact, the FS2000, guess what?
It's the same.
Pretty much the same trigger pack.
Yep.
And even in other,
the FS2000 is even closer because it has the bolt hole open.
Right. Even other bullpups that aren't necessarily clones of this system are awfully close.
Yep.
Where the AUG was very influential, at least in that regard. And it's a very interesting the way it works. And of course, there was a whole controversy. And it's a controversy that is like the only reason I would kind of want these things where usually when it comes to import of submachine gun type things, whenever these things are designed for military applications, they almost always feature an out-of-battery safety, which is also dual purpose as an auto sear whenever you're in full auto mode. It does both jobs. Now, whenever CZ was trying to import the Evo 3, there was a whole hullabaloo because the ATF said no, that's an auto sear. You can't import that, even though the way they had the ones that they were trying to import designed wouldn't work as an auto sear without substantially modifying the gun, as much as it would take anything else to substantially modify the gun. Now, it's very funny because there were then Evo 3s, factory Evo 3s with no parts changed on them because CZ tried to maintain it was because people swapped out parts. There's bone stock ones that were blowing up out of battery. Right. And it blows the gun apart because it's a polymer upper. So it looks very dramatic while in reality it's awfully safe. Yeah. You have I
wouldn't call it I would call it not unsafe.
As long as you had safety glasses and your mouth wasn't over the ejection port, you'd be fine. As long as you weren't trying to catch the
puts me in trouble.
Trying to catch the hot ones. Yeah. But back whenever FM was first importing the FS2000s and the P90s, now this to me looks like a Generation 2.
That's Gen 2.
But the Generation 1 guns had full auto hammers. They had the auto sear and the trigger pack. Yep. They had the full auto disconnector and hammer. The only thing that was missing is that the progressive trigger lets you pull it back far enough that the disconnector is disabled. Yeah. It was literally just the full auto trigger packs with semi-auto denials in them, which was really funny. Yep. And the ATF approved them for import, and there's thousands of them out there. Now, the people eventually figured out that all you have to do is then disable the disc.
Well, this is YouTube. No.
People figured out.
Shut up. No. Okay. But so you can see they made changes because this is an original military configuration one. The second generation, it still has a out of battery safety, and it's because the thing is prone to fire out of battery. Right. It's like it wants desperately to. So this one, it just puts you. See, this being an original one, it barely moves the hammer, right, as an auto sear would. But this one, the second gen, you have to first release the hammer for the safety sear to then take effect. Whereas on an auto sear, the sear releases first, and then the yeah. So it still has an out of battery safety, which is kind of slick because even after all of the hullabaloo nonsense, you still get an out of battery safety, which is a good idea.
Right, it's not a bad thing to have, especially the way this fire control group is set up for it. It's an awfully efficient way of doing that.
Yep. But yeah, this for any of you coat boys, you sit there and look at me in my face, and you tell me that's not the same. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear it. But yeah. So the other thing is, shot automatic ones, the recoil impulse is the same as a PPSH, where it just kind of vibrates in your hand. They are very controllable, but it can be so is an American 180, right? A bunch of 22LR is also very controllable. The magazine, the juice is not worth the squeeze, in my opinion.
No, because the magazines tend to have reliability issues, and for a while you couldn't ever get the 50 round mags, but you can now get the 50 round mags. Is this a 30?
It's a 50.
It's at least marked 50.
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't really remember how to really tell the difference. But for the longest time, you could only get the 30 round.
Oh no, this is a 30.
That's what I thought.
Yeah, because he's got the little denier.
It's got the blocker. Yeah. So this is one of the ones where they didn't want you to get the 50 round mags, and it was cop only. But then you can find them, but they're expensive. So they ran into those same sort of weird issues where they probably I have to believe there was a way they could have brought the 50 round mags over, but they didn't want to spoil their chances of getting deals with California cops, so they had to pretend oh, you guys get the good ones, the better ones, you're not outgunned.
Right.
Then the issue here is which sights do I use? Left, middle, or right?
All of them.
Okay.
You have to use all 4 eyes.
It does yeet that case out of there, which is entertaining. Here you go.
I don't want. People for all the talk about ergonomics of this gun, the mag change and insertion is the least ergonomic thing possible.
Yep.
It's just bad. Charging's also not terribly ergonomic, but we'll let them get away with it. Oh my god, I can barely see the sights. There we go. The iron sights are like the talk about using these with the gas mask. There is no way. You can't use them with safety glasses. And the thing that shocks me about these every time, 5.7 is meant to be so smooth.
Yeah, it's not.
Because it's blowback, I'm sure, is why this thing is so rough. But I mean, it doesn't feel feel nearly as smooth. Like you compare this to like the 1911 carbines I've built in 22 TCM. No comparison. They are so much smoother than this.
The only comparison I have, it feels exactly, shooting one of these on full auto feels exactly like a PPSH.
Right.
Which is a very different cartridge, and no one sits there saying about how smooth and low recoiling the 7.62 Toke is.
Right.
So I think it's another coat post, especially because the bolt definitely smashes into you.
Right. It definitely bottoms out, and it probably shouldn't. I especially couldn't hear that it needs to have weak springs for reliability because they put a dead blow thing on it.
Right.
It's like it's already sprung, I guess, lighter than it should be if you're putting a dead blow thing on it.
Yep.
Unless you're worried about the whole gun vibrating, but Jesus.
Yeah, I do not know what the deal is.
Bad gun.
Downward ejection is cool though.
Downward ejection is neat, but bad gun.
Yeah,
certainly.
bad gun.
But anyway, that's the P90.
It's a bad gun.
It's just a bad gun.
Just to close, people will accuse us naturally of not understanding what 5.7 is about, and that it's really good and it's actually very fun. And you know what? I agree. 5.7, the concept is really fun, where you have a sub-caliber, which means it's smaller than normal pistol caliber stuff that's in its energy range. But because it's so high velocity, it's actually kind of higher, just higher energy than 9mm NATO or whatever. So it's actually quite good in that regard. And that sort of high energy, low recoil thing sort of leaves, it leaves 9mm being like 308 and then 5.7 being like 5.56, where it's lighter, much more comfortable to shoot, get more rounds on target quicker, and it's just, at the end of the day, just more pleasant. And so, if you ask me, I really like the concept. However, there was an answer to this question that wouldn't come along till much more contemporary times. The question of
where we're going.
How do we have a light recoiling sub-caliber thing that we can put in pistol caliber stuff? And that's 22 TCM. 22 TCM took a 223 case head, essentially cut down a 223 case, and then put it to a little 40 grain 22 caliber projectile in it, and then loaded it to even higher pressures than 5.7, and so you have something that's a 45 ACP cartridge overall length, significantly shorter than 5.7, that's got more muzzle energy than 5.7. That's then, because it uses a 223 parent case, is wildly cheaper. Like, if at the time of filming 5.7's like 80 cents a round, it's just ridiculous. 5.7 sits at 35 cents a round all through the pandemic.
You mean 22 TCM?
Yeah, 22 TCM.
So it's at 35 cents.
35 cents a round all through the pandemic. Guess what? 35 cents a round. It's just a fantastic cartridge. So before anybody accuses us of not understanding what it's about, we do, except that question was answered so much.
Well, and also the other minor detail there is, which a great commenter pointed out, is gunfights aren't energy contests.
Which is true, although effect on soft armor, and if you care about penetration, at the end of the day, it's an energy question.
It's an energy question, but they're not energy. I just like that rhetorical point.
Right.
It's not an energy contest, right? Because you can cheat at an energy contest.
Right. You need an efficient transfer of energy.
Right.
Like 5.7's original loading, the one that won, was a polymer core bullet, and the problem thing, the issue it had is it cannot effectively transfer energy the way that it needed.
It just goes zoop.
The way that it needed it to, and so of course it's not just an energy contest, but having more energy is good, assuming you can transfer it in the ways you want. If that's penetrating through something, or if that's dumping it as quickly as possible, so you don't over penetrate something.
Yeah. All that to say,
Bad gun.
It's just a bad gun.
It's just a bad gun.